Hello and welcome back to the Mediate podcast. We are continuing our current series where we take a look at an album of my choice from every year of the 80s, go away, listen to them and come back and review them together. But before we look at today's album, we are once again joined by Andrew. Hi Andrew, how's it going?
Very well. Yeah, good to be back.
Good. And I think Andrew is going to talk to us a little bit about the one album that he hadn't listened to when he did his last recap of the albums that we've covered so far. So I'll hand over to him to do that if you want to, Andrew.
Indeed. So I finally listened to Hounds of Love by Kate Bush, and I didn't like it.
No.
I knew a couple of Kate Bush songs going in, but my abiding thoughts on it are perhaps if she had collaborated with King Crimson, between them they might have been able to make a decent prog album. As it stands, working in isolation, they both made bad prog albums. There were moments of something there are bits where it feels like it's going to be good and then it doesn't ever quite deliver. I was left with the feeling that her voice is like what Morrissey's voice is for people who don't like Morrissey. To do a little callback to the last album, it's not bad. It just feels like it's deliberately pitched to be kind of annoying. And every song that I was kind of enjoying gets spoiled by nonsense talking or singing to pointless effect. Just I don't know, just like some little added bit of weirdness that doesn't really do anything besides feeling like they didn't think there was enough going on, so they dragged and dropped an effect on things. And then my final thought is I would have preferred Cats of Indifference. I'm not a dog person.
Were there any songs you did enjoy?
It's the album has Running Up That Hill, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I quite like that one, but only because that's like one of the two Kate Bush songs I know. So, it's a fine song. But yeah, nothing else on the album has left enough of an impression on me that I even remember the name of it. So.
Wow. Okay. And if you were going to score it out of 10?
Oh, 4 out of 10. I was going to give it 5 out of 10, and then I realised, no. 5 out of 10 would be 5 out of 10 would be this did nothing to me, but no, this all those little bits where it didn't do anything added up to make it an actually negative experience for me. So it's 4 out of 10.
Well, I tell you what, your brother spoke more positively about the album and he gave it a lower score, so I don't know what's going on there.
It's just the chaos between the two of us.
All right.
Possibly. I think we were in fairly similar places with it, really.
Yeah.
It's okay. The rule with having Jono and Andrew on is we add up their scores together to create one normal person score. And I think that works out to be about fair.
I mean,
yeah, I think a lot of the albums would do much better if that was the case. Well, anyway, thanks, Andrew. I'm glad that you went away and listened to the album at least, and formed your own opinions on it. It would be really, really great if you could stay on and do the rest of the albums with us as well, because I thought you were a really good addition on the last episode that we did, and I'm sure you'd carry on being that.
Yeah, no, I am very happy to keep coming back as long as you want me around.
Of course, always. So, we are on the home stretch now. Only 3 or 4 episodes left. Today, we're on 1987. And with 1987, the album kind of picks itself. But before we go on to that, as usual, there are a few honourable mentions I just wanted to give a shout out to. So, first off, the seminal hard rock hair metal 80s album Appetite for Destruction came out this year by none other than Guns N' Roses. As someone who isn't a big fan of this era, of popular rock music, I do think this album deserves a shout out, not just for its significance, but it also is pretty good. So many of the band's best hits are on here: Sweet Child of Mine, Welcome to the Jungle, Paradise City, just quintessential dad rock bangers. If you can get past Axl Rose's wailing, ear-piercing vocals, then the rest of the band really know what they're doing. Next on the list is Floodland. This is an album by a band I really like called the Sisters of Mercy. These guys really put the G in Gothic. They're a band that didn't really release too many studio albums, but the ones they did were quality, including this one. It's a really dark, brooding collection of songs that still have a lot of life in them, mainly coming from their reliance on very 80s electronics as well as underlying post-punk grooves. Final album I want to mention is Substance by New Order. I have worn my Substance t-shirt that I've had for a very long time around you guys a few times, so hopefully you have an idea of what the cover looks like. New Order at this point were coming off of the back of a very tragic ending to the previous band the majority of the members were in. Had released a few moderately successful albums, but this dance and alternative pop rock album would go on to be the group's defining one, along with Power, Corruption and Lies a few years prior. Personally, for me, there are a few groups I can think of that were able to create a synth tone, an airy synth tone that is more heavenly and glistening than New Order, and building melodies with these synths as the backbone or as an additional layer is kind of the main selling point for me with them. I mean, case in point, you've got their best ever single, Blue Monday, which is a 7.5 minute masterpiece. It's on this album and it's surrounded by just as equally catchy, entertaining, entrancing tracks that really get in your bones. So if you're interested, if you're listening out there, I would definitely recommend all three of those. So now we're on to the album that we're doing today. It's called The Joshua Tree, and it's the fifth studio album by Irish rock band U2. Starting with their debut Boy in 1980, as the decade went on, they started to make more of a name for themselves from their roots more as a post-punk band, often employing a lot of these very effect-heavy guitar parts and quite socially conscious subject matter from a lyrical point of view. And with The Joshua Tree, you definitely have one of the bigger and more well-known albums that we've done so far on the series. And I find that as you're listening to it and looking at the track listing, it's no surprise, really. The first three songs, which I'm sure we'll talk more about as the episode goes on, are among the band's most famous and, to a great extent, are just huge 80s hits. But I would argue that those opening three songs don't really represent the overall sound and ideas of the album, which to me I associate more with Running to Stand Still, kind of going onwards into the second half of the album. For me, the first four songs are kind of interesting in that way. I wouldn't say it's a complete departure, but it's definitely different enough to make it worth mentioning. So I want to ask you guys, what were your first impressions listening to The Joshua Tree?
Well, I have an interesting set of first impressions because the only thing I knew about U2, other than just generally recognising the name from the ether, was that they, at some point in recent modern history, had smuggled an album onto people's iPhones, and everyone hated that. So I was like, U2, that's a shit band that no one likes. And I started listening to this Joshua Tree, and I was like, it's pretty good. There's got to be some kind of trick. Am I wrong to think it's good? Am I being played? or did they fall off a cliff at some point? In terms of quality, or maybe everyone is wrong. Maybe they're all. But I feel like it was a good album.
Didn't like the idea of somebody putting an album of theirs on their phone without their consent.
Yeah, it's like people like the PlayStation 5. Yeah, there's, some people say Xbox better or a whole bunch of other things, but if someone breaks into your house and leaves a PlayStation 5 there,
that's cool. That's Santa Claus. You're describing Santa Claus, the most loved man. But yeah, U2, I quite liked it. I think You mentioned some dad rock honourable mentions earlier, Ethan. I think I'm getting those sort of laid back, tranquil, almost moods and vibes from U2, and I quite enjoyed it. But what about everyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I knew the first three songs quite well heading into this, so it was nice to hear those, and then also sort of hear some more from the album. But it took a while for it to get an impression on me, this album, really. I mean, some of that's just from the way I listen to all of these albums, where I'll be out and about doing things at work or whatever. So especially when it's music like this that's kind of just sort of softly there and washing over you, it's kind of, it doesn't quite have many moments where it sort of kicks up and says, hey, listen to me now. But I sort of, despite that, did find it kind of building up the more times I listened to it. And a particular moment was just kind of reading through Bleak News, basically, and listening to Bullet the Blue Sky, where I was just like, yeah, this music makes sense. It was kind of the, I don't want to say depressing peak of it, but like the moment where I was like, I'm listening to the right soundtrack for this.
Yeah, I think similarly to Johnny, I had a history with the first three songs. So U2, I think, are my dad's favourite band, and he always says that this is his favourite album. But funnily enough, I had never actually heard this album until we did it for the podcast. But what I have heard a lot of times is the Best of U2 1980 to 1990 compilation album, which, of the Joshua Tree's songs, only has the first three. So I knew those songs really, really well. So it was fun to kind of actually hear the rest of the music in the Joshua Tree.
Yeah, for me, similarly, the first three songs I know very well. Oddly enough, I know the fourth song, Bullet the Blue Sky, very well, because for some reason, the U2 albums that I have listened to most, the first one probably the U2 18 Singles album, which is a compilation, but very good. And then Rattle and Hum, their live album of them touring America, which features a live version of Bullet the Blue Sky, which is the version of it I know rather than this one from this album, although they're surprisingly similar, or I guess unsurprisingly similar. They are ultimately the same song, just being performed in different places. But yes, my abiding takeaway of this album was how American it seems. How, like, it seems to be trying to evoke America, which feels like a very interesting decision for an Irish band.
I think it surprises quite a lot of people that they are Irish, unless you actually are aware of the band, because as you said, they have a very American sound. A lot of the subject matter is about American culture, or trying to pull together this idea of an American identity or an American place. Like, I'll talk about this more as we go on, but listening to this album, I can definitely picture and imagine scenarios and settings quite well in my head, which is a massive plus for an album to do. I already like an album if it can do something like that, and everything that I picture is to do with like these vast open spaces, like, you know, fields in the Midwest and stuff like that. Basically, like, I don't know. I listen to this album and I just think of, you know, fucking John Steinbeck novels. Like, I imagine those two characters from Of Mice and Men, like, walking down an open road, you know, the sun setting in the background and stuff. And yeah, it definitely evokes that, listening to it, for sure.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that as well. I picked up on some sort of, I don't know if this is the technical term, but some kind of cowboy string instrument being played in Running Fast to Stand Still, whatever that one is called.
Yeah, I mean, I think they were getting into a kind of bluesy sort of sound and experimenting with that. I mean, whenever you bring a harmonica in, that's going to give it a certain twang. But yeah, I was reading a little bit about how with In God's Country, they weren't sure for a while whether that was a song about Ireland or it was about the US, before eventually sort of settling on it being about America, which I think is sort of interesting, just with the sort of thought of the difficulty to kind of tell some of the Irish roots through this album, whereas with one of the probably first and most iconic U2 song for me being Sunday Bloody Sunday, which is
very distinctly Irish.
Yeah, as much as you can get. But I mean, that said, Red Hill Mining Town is very UK.
It could be, but they have mining towns in.
Yeah, but
America.
I think it's specifically.
No, but it's
about
specifically about the mining strikes, isn't it? In the 80s,
Yeah.
right? That's the song.
Yeah, so I think that one's definitely trying to evoke, well, I guess perhaps a shared thing across both US and more over this side of the pond. But
I think anything that is about America kind of has to be about how it's such a big cultural melting pot, and there's obviously a lot of Irish influence in there, so it makes sense, for it to be this.
Yes, I mean, I don't think it's
hybrid
unnatural.
project.
They were the album after this was Rattle and Hum, the album from when they were touring America. Like they were likely in America. They had America on their minds. It's not a criticism when I say that this is it made me think of America. It feels in some ways American. Like that I'm not meaning to criticize them through that. I think America is an interesting thing that's worth writing songs about, and they wrote some pretty good songs about them.
especially with Bullet the Blue Sky, which in a way is kind of a no matter where you are, you can't escape America.
Yes. Yeah.
Or very specifically not being able to escape it from wherever they were writing at the time. I can't remember the exact details.
Johnny, it's interesting that you mentioned that the album has a bluesy sound, because for me, a lot of those later tracks, they're more kind of like folky, and I talked a little bit about how I can imagine such vivid things in my head. But for me, a song like In God's Country, what I picture listening to it is like a group of Irish migrants around a campfire at night singing some of the songs together. And I think a lot of the songs have a bit of a communal feel to them. Like Trip Through Your Wires is a little bit like that as well. Trip Through Your Wires is one of my favourite songs on the album, by the way, just because of how like jolly and upbeat it is. And like I said, it has that communal feel to them. Like it sounds like a song that you could imagine people singing together, people that come from, I don't know, a poor background, they've been moving around a lot. And I think that was something that I didn't really... I underestimated it the first time I listened to this album, which was, this is kind of what I expected from a U2 album. It's a bit undynamic, not much really happens. It kind of starts and then just sort of recycles through the same ideas. But then the more I listen to the album, I think every time I've listened to this album, I've enjoyed it more and more and more. And it's gotten to the point where I've just noticed that it has way more of a depth, and it has a lot more to say than the first time that I listened to it, which I'm really happy about.
Yeah. No, that is the thing I felt kind of quickly going through and just sort of looking at the songs and what they're about, and just sort of thinking, God, each of these is about something interesting.
Yeah.
Which is a depth you don't get in a lot of bands.
Yeah, definitely agree with Ethan when you said that it was growing on you with each listen. The only problem is I was enjoying it eat more each time, so I was listening to it more and more, and then I got a little bit of burnout on it. I was like, oh no, I'm like hating it each time. I gotta stop going down the other side of the curve before we do the review. But yeah, as you mentioned, it has that sort of depth. I really like that it's almost like, obviously I kind of see why the earlier start, the first three, made it on the best of. Now that's what I call U2 sections with that starting three, because they're this sort of like, I'd say like the more heroic sounding ones. But I do like the kind of journey that it goes on, in a sense of like it starts off with these kind of more powerful ones, and it eventually ends in these like really sorrowful last tracks, I feel.
Oh yeah, the final song is like, yeah, the final song is really tragic. I completely agree with you, Tony. I like the fact that we've been talking now for about 10-ish, 15 minutes on the podcast, and we've already mentioned Bullet the Blue Sky in a good way. And this is a song that it's so like... You guys talked about how the songs you were most familiar with were like Where the Streets Have No Name, With or Without You, because those are the big hits, right? But for me, Bullet the Blue Sky was actually the song that I knew the most going into this album. And I was like, in my mind, the rest of the album wasn't going to sound like that. And originally, it was something that I didn't like about the album, because for me, and I think you guys probably know my tastes well enough now to know that a song like Bullet the Blue Sky would appeal to me way more than everything on the rest of this album, for a lot of reasons. And it is kind of like an eyebrow raiser. Like, you hear these first three songs that are just massive hits, and Bullet the Blue Sky, for me, is the first song that takes you into different territory and makes you go, that's kind of interesting. I wasn't expecting the album to kind of go this route or go here, but I also kind of didn't have that experience because I already knew the song really well going into it, which is a shame, because I'd have loved to have experienced that song for the first time listening to the Joshua Tree as it is, because I just think it's a fantastic song and it's my favourite on the album.
Yeah, with the way that I sort of came into this album by letting it sort of wash over me first whilst going about my job. The one of the phrases that did stick in my head was "Into the Welcoming Arms of America," which is one of the last lines of Bullet the Blue Sky, and so it was one of those songs that did just stand out and stick with me. And then that was also the main one as I was reading depressing news articles about school shootings in America, which isn't really even what that song is about, but it has that energy, that sort of thought of the welcoming arms of America just has.
I mean, it's not about the inherent like violence of America as like a concept.
Yeah,
it is
linked in that way.
It is deeply rooted in, the military-industrial complex, money, capitalism, and the violence of imperialism, bombs. I don't know. It is. Again, I agree with you, Ethan. I think "Bullet the Blue Sky" is the best song on this album by a long way, it just...
I think as soon as you hear that opening drum groove, like, you're getting something that's...
It just has so much more presence than anything else exactly on the album. And it is so urgent and, like, immediate and just, like, I don't know, hypnotic and, like, menacing. And it's just, like, one of their most compelling songs, I think, on any of their albums, not just on this one.
Yeah, definitely. For multiple reasons, and I hope you guys know why I had such an issue with "The Queen Is Dead" going into "Frankly, Mr. Shankly." Like, this is what it's about. You get, like, you talk about urgency. That's exactly what this song has. It has momentum. It has energy. It has this really like dirty, gritty mood about it. It's like a really filthy song. It has bite. It's
like
it's
even
good.
Bono's like talking section where he's talking about I can see those dollar bills, 100, 200, slapping them down. It's just it's good. It's real good.
That bit has a kind of Talking Heads feel to it. It's
right,
the feeling I got. Like that wouldn't be out of place off of one of their songs.
Man, Talking Heads wish they wrote "Bullet the Blue Sky."
I feel like another reason why I like Bullet the Blue Sky so much is kind of for the reasons you've talked about. I think Bono's performance on the track, it's just so like... I think because of the sort of inherent sound that U2 go for on a lot of their songs, it means that Bono doesn't really have the license to change it up and do something different. Like, he kind of... I'll talk a bit more about this later, but he does have a similar approach to every song. And like he's a good singer, like he's technically good, not really got any issues there. I just wish he was a bit more varied, but also that U2's songs gave him, like I said, that license to try and experiment and like be a bit different. And I think that Bullet the Blue Sky, just because of the tone, like that really noisy guitar feedback that kind of creates the main melody along with the bass line, just that whole atmosphere means that Bono's kind of he's in a situation now where like he can approach the song in a different way, and I think it comes through really well. And I wish that there were other. I kind of Exit is another song on the album that sort of does this a little bit, which I'll talk about. But for the most part, it all comes back to what I was saying about the Joshua Tree. The first time that I listened to it, it felt a bit undynamic and a bit unvaried. And I think Bono's voice and the way that he sings was a large part of why that was. But that I was very happy that Bullet the Blue Sky was very different and just stood out so much, even though I knew the song quite well going into it.
I think you are right that there's this undynamicness for most of the album. That if there were more sort of standouts where new things were tried, the album would be better. But I also feel like a lot of that, I guess, staticness then that is in the album then sort of lends it to this kind of like languishing sort of feel that, although I don't think it makes like the individual songs on their own better, like as a listening experience of just like having it on and sort of having it be like an accompaniment piece as you're a cowboy driving down those dirt roads doing your cowboy activities, sort of adds that, I guess, more mellow approach, which I think works. So
it is, yeah, I think you're right. It's songs for wide open spaces where you don't have the means to move very quickly, or where you're not in a hurry. It's not an album you'd listen to if you were racing a car, but like if you were going on a slow road trip across, America. If you were in, say, a tour bus crossing the American Midwest, these are the songs that would maybe comfort you or come to your mind.
What do you guys think of the guitar work on the album generally? Like, what do you think of The Edge, as he's called, as a guitarist? Because he's got a bit of a like he's kind of known for being a bit, I guess, like one note, like over reliant a little bit on the same kind of effects to achieve his sound, and not being very diverse. I don't know if you guys agree.
Yeah,
but it's really cool. It's the same way with Bono, kind of doing a very similar delivery in every song. They found a winning formula, and they're gonna hit those beats. He does go pretty crazy with the effects. I mean, there's that great Bill Bailey video of like, here's a U2 concert if there was a technical problem. But I think it's a standout of the album, really. And I guess we've already kind of talked about the first few songs, and then the kind of shift into the more kind of folksy stuff. And I guess I'd argue that there are songs in the second half of the album that don't go as kind of crazy with some of the effects work, and there is some really solid stuff from The Edge in there.
Even then, on the opening few tracks, he's I think the effects, and by effects I mean it's like, we've got a guitar riff here, let's just slap some reverb and delay on it and then call it a day. They still come through like really well, like, because we haven't really broken down any of the songs yet, but Where the Streets Have No Name, the first thing that you hear, and I don't know if this is a guitar or not, it could be something else producing this, but the way the song starts, it's like it has this glow up that's really ethereal before that guitar riff kind of comes in. It's quiet, then it gets louder and louder and louder, and it just has this sort of higher plane feeling to it, which I really like. And I think a lot of that comes from the guitar work. It's like a very it has this very sparkling, flickering quality to it, which I think suits that song in particular really, really well, but also suits other songs quite well. Even on something like With or Without You, the guitar work on that, again, it's got this kind of like sweeping feeling to it, and it's a guitar sound that has effects behind it, but achieves something that I think is it's slightly different, and it's really, really good, and it's so gentle. Like, I think of the first sort of 30 to 40 seconds of With or Without You. We've got to talk about Brian Eno at some point, because it's so strange that he co-produced this album. But like that sort of gentle, very, very delicate, fragile way that With or Without You starts, and really the whole song is like, it's quite impressive. Like, it's very, very pleasant on the ears. It's not harsh at all. It just has this really sweet tone about it. It's nice to listen to. It's really nice to listen to.
Is Brian Eno kind of like Hesh from The Sopranos in the episode A Hit Is a Hit, where he just saw U2 and was like, that's a hit. It is interesting that he does have his fingerprints over so many of the albums that we've kind of done so far. But I guess he's kind of like, if you're talking about great music from the 80s, Brian Eno's always going to come up.
And 70s as well. I mean, when we did Talking Heads, I know Andrew and Johnny talked a little bit about David Bowie. There is definitely this thing in history where if David Bowie and Brian Eno never meet, then who knows what the fucking music landscape would look like today. The same with George Martin and the Beatles, Rick Rubin and half of the hip-hop artists that came out of the 80s and 90s. Brian Eno's a very, very important guy in the industry. He's probably more well known for working with very artsy, I don't want to say pretentious, but very artsy, out there acts, and not a band that's going to be occupying radio stations quite a lot in the 80s. That's why I think it's interesting that he worked on an album like this, because I wouldn't have ever thought it, and when I saw that he was a credit on here, it just kind of surprised me. There is another really cool thing that I like about one of these songs. I'm just trying to remember which one it is. I think it's one that we mentioned earlier on, Running to Stand Still, which is a song about a drug addicted couple in Dublin. And there's this line earlier on in the song that I really like, where Bono says, "Step on a steam train," and then in the background, what you can hear is a palm muted guitar part that kind of chugs along again in this very gentle way that sounds like a steam train in the distance. And I just think, again, it's just another small thing like that makes me really appreciate the songwriting on this album, because it's very vivid, it evokes something, and it works with the lyrics of the song really well too. I don't know if you guys had any other like songs or moments like that you wanted to mention or talk about as standing out particularly for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, with Running to Stand Still, it has got some great lyrics to it, as well as just that title, very evocative. But yeah, as well, the standout for me is "You gotta cry without weeping, talk without speaking, scream without raising your voice," which just...
You see, that didn't do anything for me. I just thought that was boring platitudes.
Yeah.
Just like, I don't know, that doesn't seem very clever to me. That's just, imagine talking but not saying anything. Woo.
To me, that song is kind of a real shift in the album in terms of when it's going to kind of heed into more kind of folk music of a vibe. And I guess in the kind of talking about America theme, it definitely reminds me more of a kind of Bob Dylan or Bruce Springsteen kind of a vibe. Especially with, anytime there's a harmonica in a song, I'm going to think about Bob Dylan.
I mean, I think for me, the problem is Bullet of the Blue Sky is too good of a song that everything else that comes after it is kind of a disappointment. They don't do anything as interesting as that for the rest of the album. For me, my like second favourite song on the album, outside of the first three, which I kind of discount just because I've heard them so many times, I almost have segregated them away from the album. They're like off in their own space. They're the singles. They're not really. They don't belong to this album. They
transcend.
Yeah, they're elsewhere now. liked In God's Country because it was fast and short and, to the point. It had insistent guitar, which I like, and the other songs all kind of felt gentler, slower, a little bit looser, which can be nice. But my controversial opinion, I've been saving to upset you all with, the last two songs did nothing for me. If you got tricked by the quiet at the start of Exit and thought it was the end of the album and you stopped the album there, I don't think you'd miss anything, because those songs don't do anything.
I think I kind of almost agree that like you could do without them in a sense, like take the name of Exit as the cue to leave the album. But I still think it's like I know Ethan hates this, if you have the two instrumentals at the end of an album. But even though these songs have vocals, they do feel more of like rather than being like final tracks, they're more like bonus rounds, bonus levels in my opinion. And that's partly just because of how different they are. They're just like, okay, I don't weigh them as the same as the other
I
ones.
do wonder if they were meant to be like secret bonus tracks, like Endless Nameless on
Nevermind.
It is Nevermind, yes. Which is the only song that has ever successfully jump scared me by making me forget that I had it playing, and then suddenly Kurt Cobain is talking to me after I thought I was alone in my room. But yeah, no, I hate albums that have secret hidden tracks on. I think it is pretentious and annoying, and I imagine, because it shows up on the track listing, that is not the case for this album, but they felt like they could have been secret hidden tracks, and
Well, you know what I always say about the final track on an album, so I'm not even going to say it. Because I feel like we've done so many podcasts now where we've talked about the first half and the second half not being as good. I actually did an experiment and flipped the album, and did give it a listen, starting from Mother of the Disappeared, and then ending with Where the Streets Have No Name. I don't know why I did it. I didn't particularly get a different impression of the album from doing it, but I guess I wanted to know if I did still think that the first few songs are as strong. And doing so did give me an appreciation for some tracks. I think my kind of love of Exit came when I listened to it as the second track. And that's definitely stayed. I think that is a really strong highlight of the second half of the album, or the first half in my listening experience of it. And it is quite cool to have the kind of brilliant opening of the album and in that beginning of When the Streets Have No Name as a kind of closer. But yeah, I don't particularly know why I did this. I don't think I'd do it again. But I thought, if I'm ever going to bring it up in this podcast, now's the time.
It's a good science experiment. I always wonder how much of that trend that we notice of the first half being better is just the fact that the second half always suffers from the fatigue of even if an album that has lots of really good different songs on it, it's going to be the same People the whole time. It's going to be that sameness that your brain gets used to.
But then why don't we draw the same attention to it as we would a film? I mean, I know we tend to say things like, oh, I preferred the first half of this film to the second half, but no one's ever thought about watching a film with the second half first.
I guess it's just because they wouldn't make sense at all if you were to recut it.
Yes. I mean, you say that, Ethan. I am certain people have thought, you know what, today I'm just going to watch the second half of Phantom Menace because I feel like watching from the pod race only.
But then you wouldn't catch people watching the first half afterwards, would you? It would just be the second half, and then we're done.
All killer, no filler.
I mean, you having said that does now make me want to go and watch the Phantom Menace from the middle to the end, and then from the beginning to the middle, to see if I get anything else out of it.
I feel like I'm actually quite good at not when it comes to listening to an album, not getting kind of bored halfway through, or that being the reason why, or just even getting a bit kind of exhausted of the sound, that being the reason why I would prefer the first half to a second half. Lately, I feel like I've been listening to a lot of albums where I've preferred the second half, and it's just grown on me the more and more I kind of get through it. I think maybe it's just because there's an initial rough adjusting period sometimes, and then you get into the swing of it and you get into the flow of it a little bit more, and then the second half ends up being more rewarding than the first half. I feel like I get that with a lot of albums, to be honest. But at the same time, I think I always say that the main reason why people like first halves of albums more is genuinely because people tend to put their singles on the first halves of albums. So the famous tracks tend to be closer to the start, you know.
This is a great example of that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's great that you like Exit as much as you do, Harry, because I know Andrew said he wasn't a fan. I love this song as well. I think it's a really good exercise in building this rising intensity, but gradually, and not doing it all in once. I think Bono is key to this. I think the way that Bono's voice kind of rises, gains volume, and like gains this, I don't know, this like snarl to it as well, a little bit like on But at the Blue Sky, works really well. And then you get these parts in Exit where it sounds like the way the instruments are sort of, the way they come together feels like they're crashing against each other like a storm at work. So it reminds me a lot of Because I'm So Heavy, the Beatles song. I mean, it's not as mind-numbing as Because I'm So Heavy. Because She's So Heavy. But it has that same, like... it has that same sound of just a storm of sounds together, just, like, battering each other and, like, trying to one-up each other in a way. And again, it's a part on the album where things sound really harsh and ugly, and that normally tends to appeal to me more than something that sounds very pristine and pretty and beautiful. So Exit was definitely a high point for me as well. It's
a good kind of synthesis of the kind of American and Irish rock, and then the kind of folk elements that kind of run throughout the entire album, to the point that it would have made a fantastic final track. But I don't even need to say what I was going to say about Mother of the Disappeared, because you can probably work it out. But I have no problem with that as a final song.
Yeah, neither do I. It's so strange that Andrew just hates those last two.
I mean, I don't hate them. Let me talk you through this a bit more. So with Exit, I have a thing about songs that have like a long, slow build-up that don't really do anything, and all Exit ever builds up to is sounding like a band is playing something heavy and loud, but at such a distance that it's not quite able to, shake you in any way. It's like there might be a band over there in the distance a couple of miles away that are playing a good song, but I can't really hear it from here. And, it feels like it doesn't, for me, reach a sort of satisfying climax. It is just...
He's called The Edge, Andrew. Come on.
He's called The Edge because of his nose, alright? Apparently, he said. He may have been joking, I don't know, but he says it's because of his nose and not because of his, whatever else it might be.
The lack of satisfaction you receive.
And Mothers of the Disappeared, it's called Mothers of the Disappeared. Like, I was expecting it to be, something. I was expecting to be crying at the end of it, and the lyrics are like nothing, and it's nothing. It's like you two have made songs that have got me close to tears, and like that. You have a song called Mothers of the Disappeared. I wanted to feel something. I wanted to, confront the horrors of like human existence, and no, it's just a very forgettable song with lyrics that are vague and uninspired, and that's what they end the album on, and it's a bit of a letdown, in my opinion.
I feel like, even though I kind of can't even really call them inspired or not vague, I still got that sense of sadness and sorrow from Mothers of the Disappeared. I'm a simple man. I'd say to that, I guess. I got what they were going for. But when it comes to two songs together in this album, that I kind of felt a little bit of, this isn't exactly working for me. In that sort of the double bill of Red Hill Mining Town and In God's Country. Although there are parts of those two songs that I do like, I feel like, as I mentioned earlier, although there's this kind of like sameness of the album is one of its strengths. It gives it that sort of consistency. I also feel like around that sort of 3/4-ish mark, that the fatigue was kind of setting in off the long journey of like, oh, he's really stretching out those vocals. It's kind of grating on the back of my brain at this point. So I think that'd probably be where I'd put the weakness of the album down. You know, no, it's bad.
Tony, would you say the thing that makes or breaks enjoying an album or not? I'm not saying that you hated this or loved it or anything like that, but would you say the vocals is the most important thing for you? Because you often talk about that as like...
I think it's because I'm a hack and I don't know the names of all the other instruments. But if someone's speaking, I'm like, I don't know what that is. So hopefully that answers your question.
My dude is not musically aware enough to talk about the bassoon.
Fuck! I can't tell if he's making that one up or not to make fun of me.
the triangle solo in Trip Through Your Wires just...
You're not fooling me now this time. I know that one's a shape.
If we're talking about the vocals in that song, it does have a very irritating kind of like woohoo cowboy sound effect. That I'm sure isn't a sound effect, but it does play a few times in that song, and it does annoy me, to be honest. In that classic Kate Bush style of sometimes there's just 2 or 3 things in a song that make it a bad song.
Was there anything anyone else wanted to comment on or talk about?
No. I mean, I know we've mentioned a lot about America, but specifically I feel like it is alluding to like the past as well. Maybe that's just because we're listening to it now and this album is like 1,000 years old. But there's this sense of history that I get from listening to this, from those cowboy mythical instruments that you've mentioned, and the rest of the subject matter that sort of make it feel like a nice little history lesson via music, which is quite nice.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Tony, because I actually have kind of 2 things I wanted to touch on as a result of that. You feeling like you're listening to something from history is kind of how I feel. I've even got some notes about it for the next album that we're doing, where it just feels like you're listening to a slice of something that is very much in one of its earliest forms, and there's something really cool about it. The second thing is, you mentioned that you're listening to an album that's like 1,000 years old, right? And I was doing my notes for the albums that I picked for 1989, and as I was writing them, I was like, holy shit, these albums are only now 10 years older than Tony. Like, I've got to mention that to him to make him feel really old.
Those albums were always 10 years older than me.
Well, the one we did for 1980 wasn't 10 years older than you. It was 20. It's the ones from the late 80s where it's like they're within touching distance of you, Tony, of how old you are. I wanted to make you feel old.
I'm feeling like I'm one of the first pilgrims across to America, riding my cowboy across the ocean.
I mean, the feeling I get from this is, although there is a history to it, there is also a timelessness to it. Like, I think where the streets have no name as a kind of, I believe it's sort of remarking on just how much the area you're born will dictate about you, and the sort of a desire to escape that feels just as prevalent now. Searching for things, the like poignancy of Bullet the Blue Sky, like that's still just as relevant today. In God's Country is sort of about the apathy and the lack of ideas in America and sort of a bunch of countries. It still feels just as relevant. I don't know. So that's the feeling of, there is a history to it, but also a timelessness to what they were singing about.
Yeah,
and I don't think you can say Bullet the Blue Sky is timeless, because if you brought it back to the Tudor period, they wouldn't know what a fighter plane is.
Yeah, fair point. Fair point.
They're able to smuggle a lot of a lot of this stuff in the form of very kind of accessible music as well. Like I think, like obviously as I've already mentioned, it's my dad's favorite album, and I know for a fact that he went to see kind of what probably would have been the kind of arena show for this album or this era of U2, and then enjoyed it so much that he kind of went again the next day and brought a ticket off someone outside so he could go again. And I think a lot of that live appeal was in the way, you know, they would do some of those kind of effects live and some of the lights and that kind of big kind of sense of community. And there's kind of big shows that I guess it would be a band like Coldplay would probably be like the kind of modern equivalent, and how they kind of evolved that kind of big live kind of element to their music. So the fact that they're able to kind of essentially sell the album off some really kind of fantastic bangers at the start, and then also make an album that is quite thematically deep and is almost kind of a folk kind of continuation of some of those kind of great American folk artists. Yeah, it's I think it's a great album. It's a classic.
I think that's a really good point, actually. Just because I do feel like with U2, you definitely get a sound that is really, really approachable. And then there's even though a lot of these songs have subject matter and topics that are quite depressing or downhearted or anything, I still think that their overall sound is really feel good. And like as you're listening to it, you kind of get a like a very positive feeling. Like it is uplifting, and I could imagine seeing a band like U2 being really, really great, because there's also nothing really like controversial about them really or their sound. It's just very, like as I said, approachable. It's welcoming. I don't think it sounds particularly dated either. Like I think we've done other albums on this series. Like, so I mean, my favorite album that we've done so far, Purple Rain, it still sounds like it sounds so 80s. It's unbelievable. Whereas I don't think this sounds like that 80s. It doesn't. There isn't anything that I listen to on Joshua Tree and think, oh wow, that hasn't aged well, or you know, that sounds old fashioned now. Like I think it's aged really, really well. And I think if you played it to somebody in Tudor times, they'd probably really enjoy it too.
I think they would, but they wouldn't pick up on all the themes. That's
Sure. But yeah, I think Tony was about to make a point on wrapping this up. If we want to go over to conclusions, who wants to go first?
I will. I am going to give this 7 out of 10. It's a good album. I like it.
Respectable. I will go next. I was approaching the 7 out of 10 landing position, but a couple extra listens made me realise, like, no, there's more power here. I like this more than that. I think over time that sort of that languid, sort of tranquil vibe, that old timiness was growing on me more and more, and then I just overdid it, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna settle for an 8. So there you go.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you, Tony, and say this is about as solid of an 8 as we've ever done on Music Mates.
Wait, Harry, before you say anything next, Jono, Ethan, what do you two think about the album?
Nice one.
He snuck it in at the last moment. He should have prepared for this. Yeah, it was a thought I had when we started recording this of, oh yeah, we give these a score at the end. I forgot to think about that. And yeah, then I sort of was thinking through what feels the best number to give, especially with my extra limited version.
Johnny,
I
you
think...
don't have to do that. You know, you can just give it the number that you feel is closest.
But I mean, if I was to put the number I feel, then I don't feel any number describes an album. So, but yeah, within my limitations, I think this does enough for me that I will put it on the same shelf as Purple Rain, and I shall give it a 10. It took a while for me to warm up to it, to be honest, but now that I have, and like it makes sense to me, and I shall give it a 10.
Johnny, why did you not just type the number 10? Why did you copy it from Purple Rain?
It's because my keyboard makes a very loud sound, and it is next to the mic.
Okay. Luckily, the podcast has not been ruined by someone bringing that up for no reason. You can cut this out. Ethan.
It's also like passing a trophy on down through the ages. You know, you don't want to just make another one. It's got to be the same 10.
There's also the secret column where Johnny puts his real scores in, which I hadn't seen until now. So,
as for me, my main takeaway, as I've kind of already talked about, is that I wouldn't say I wasn't massively keen on it, but I didn't love it when I first listened to it, but it has grown on me quite a lot. There are things I appreciate more about the way the album grows, the way it evolves. I definitely see more the changes and switch ups and the depth that kind of grows out from it as it goes on. And I think, again, with a song like Bullet the Blue Sky, there's a lot of raw aggression on that track, and that's the sort of thing that I like a lot to listen to. So, again, because the album doesn't have enough of that atmosphere going for it, there's always going to be a certain cap that I think I'll always struggle to get past, no matter how many times I listen to this album. But having said that, still really enjoyed it enough, and I think I will join the majority of you and give it an 8 out of 10 as well. Very, very solid 8 out of 10.
Makes my copy and paste job easier.
So that concludes 1987. As I said, only a few more episodes left now. We're going into 1988 soon. And I'm really excited for the next episode because we're going to be doing an album from a genre that we haven't... Well, I guess we kind of have done it on a bonus episode when we did Childish Gambino, but that doesn't really count. We haven't really done this genre yet, so I'm very, very keen to get your thoughts and takes on that when we do that episode. So I guess we will see you then. Take care.